All right, let's dive right into a question that has echoed through centuries of theology. What is the status of the Jewish people after the coming of Christ? I mean, is there a future for them as a nation, or have all the promises made to them in the Bible been, well, transferred to the church? This single verse from the Apostle Paul has fueled a massive, and I mean massive, ongoing debate. How you interpret this has shaped history, theology, and even modern-day geopolitics. Today, we're going to unpack the two major historical answers to that question. For a huge chunk of church history, one answer really dominated the whole conversation. It's an idea known as supersessionism, or as many call it, replacement theology. So what is supersessionism? Well, at its core, it's the belief that the covenant God made with the nation of Israel is now basically obsolete. In this view, the church is now the new Israel. That means all those specific promises made to ethnic Israel in the Old Testament, they're now fulfilled spiritually in the worldwide church. And this is where it gets really interesting, because this view completely changes how you read huge parts of the Bible. Specific physical promises, like the promise of returning to the land of Israel, they get allegorized. They stop being literal prophecies for specific people and instead become spiritual metaphors for, say, a Christian's journey to heaven. So under this framework, there's just no special, distinct prophetic future for the Jewish nation. Okay, so here's a common argument you'll hear today. People say that this whole idea of a future for national Israel is a pretty modern invention, something that only got popular in the last couple of hundred years. But, the historical record? It tells a very, very different story. In fact, when you actually look back, you find that some of Christianity's most heavyweight thinkers, theologians who lived long before the 20th century, were passionately arguing for a literal, future restoration of the Jewish people, not just to their Messiah, but to their land. So let's hear directly from these guys, these theological heavyweights. We'll start with the famous 19th century Prince of Preachers, the one and only Charles Spurgeon. Spurgeon was absolutely 100% unambiguous about this. When he was talking about Ezekiel's vision of the dry bones, he completely rejected any attempt to spirit away the text. For him, it meant exactly what it said, a literal political restoration of the Jewish people to their own land with their own nationality. Plain and simple. But he didn't just stop at a political restoration. He saw two separate promises in the scripture. There was one for the nation, to return to its land, but there was also a promise for the soul. A huge, widespread spiritual revival where the Jewish people would finally come to recognize Jesus as their Messiah. Okay, now let's go back even further. Let's rewind to the 18th century and talk about arguably America's most famous theologian, Jonathan Edwards. A full 100 years before Spurgeon, he had the exact same conviction. He called the future national conversion of the Jews one of the most certain prophecies in all of Scripture. And you really have to appreciate how strong his conviction was here. I mean, think about it. When Edwards was writing this, the Jewish people were scattered all over the globe, often poor and persecuted. The land of Israel, it was controlled by the Ottoman Empire. A sovereign Jewish state seemed politically impossible. But Edwards, just based on his reading of prophecy, was absolutely certain it was going to happen. This belief was actually a crucial part of his optimistic view of the end times, a framework we call postmillennialism. He saw history unfolding in stages. So first, a period of suffering, then the gospel would explode, leading to a golden age. And that age would see the collapse of what he called anti-Christian kingdoms and would be kicked into high gear by a great revival among the Jewish people. He saw that as a key event right before the final return of Christ. So what we have here are two very different views, and both of them have deep historical roots. This is not a modern debate. It's an ancient one that is very much alive and well today. And here's the crucial point, the real takeaway. This is not just some dusty academic exercise. Your viewpoint on this directly impacts how you read about a third of the Bible, how you understand God's promises, and how you interpret events happening on the world stage right now. So it leaves us with this final thought, right? This ancient debate, carried on by giants like Spurgeon and Edwards, isn't just about the past. It forces every one of us to ask how our own reading of these texts shapes how we understand the present and what we expect for the future.